So we're here because of the Supreme Court ruling where parents are now able to opt out of LGBTQ books if they, believe that it's their religious purposes, something that they don't necessarily believe in or agree with. Um, can you just tell me your approach to LGBTQ content in the classroom and teaching materials and how you foster an inclusive environment?
Yeah, no, the key word there is inclusiveness. If we start removing books based on, any number of things, in the classroom, whether it be for, personal checkout for kids, or if we decide that our curriculum, needs to eliminate or remove, certain books, we forget that um, the whole child is not dictated by the Supreme Court. The whole child is not dictated by, even a parent's thought process or a teacher's thought process. You have to give space for kids to figure things out. And when we start to eliminate things like Charlotte's Web, there was a big fuss about Charlotte's Web maybe not being appropriate for schools because of the talking animals, right? That gets kids thinking that, oh, animals could talk, and it just seems kind of, I don't know. If you start removing LGBTQ plus literature, queer literature from schools, then you are then negating kids who maybe identify. You negate their acceptance maybe of themselves, or in the larger community.
Can you expand on that and this ruling overall? Just what is your reaction, just in general to this ruling, and what do you think the consequences might be?
Well, I first at the school level, the consequences are the amount of time that is going to then have to be put into the book bans in the groups that have to decide whether or not a parent's complaint is worthy of, following through. I think, like from a personal point of view, I think it's incredibly important for parents to be involved in their kids' education and having those conversations about books. With my own queer literature available on my bookshelves, I think one of the biggest fears for people is, oh, you're gonna, mind wash my kid into being, gay. That's not what's happening here. I don't have some explicit like rainbow covered bookshelf that's like this is only for, it's a matter of parents having an open communication before with educators and school districts before there is this major push to then ban things. So my initial, I guess, look at all of this is cool, great, get parents in on the conversation. But the big issue then, of course, is the time that it takes to then work through those bans and all of the legalese, if you will. And then determining who that impacts. Is it really just a matter of, parents having control, or are we and forgetting the whole child? Or is it, wanting to slap school districts on the wrist for, quote, exposing kids to illicit or improper material? I think that there's a lot more at hand here when we put so much control in the Supreme Court and otherwise, rather than having conversations. The conversations are where the time should be spent.
Have you had any experiences personally with parents requesting to opt out of certain material that might have some of these subjects?
Not in curriculum. Um, we do teach a book that has been banned in several other school districts like Huckleberry Finn, for Twain's over 200 times uses of the N word. But in terms of queer literature, LGBTQ plus literature, I have not faced any backlash. I think that again, the conversations come in terms of like me and my students. I say, hey, this you've picked out this book. I do want to tell you that maybe the two main characters have um, that it is a queer love story, and is that something you're comfortable with, or have you ever read anything like this before? And we have really good conversations, and oftentimes it's kids who feel They identify that way that are checking out that material, which offer great conversations. But sometimes it's kids who are like, we always talk about the importance of empathy in reading, that sometimes we need to read the stories of other people so that we can have a broader understanding of why is there hate, or why is there concern, or why is it that people don't understand? And exposing ourselves to the stories of people unlike ourselves can be really, really beneficial. But those conversations happen between myself and student, and sometimes myself and parents. But I've never had a parent explicitly say, no, my child is not allowed to read that book that features a gay character, or a book that features bi curiosity. That has never, very fortunately, happened to me.
Do you think that this ruling will now make parents more aware of things that might happen without their, concern, or be more hyper aware, or wanting to be more involved in the relationship between you and the student?
Absolutely. I think that, and which again, I do not frown upon parent involvement. I guess my biggest fear to come from this ruling is that that involvement is going to encroach upon, the free will of students, of kids. Um, I worry that there are going to be kids who all of a sudden need a space where they feel included and seen, and that's going to be stripped away from them. Um, Again, I go back on the idea, I want parents to be involved, but the concern is the more people who get involved without being educated or concerned about the whole kid. Parents who are just getting involved to throw this ruling around because, I don't know, entitlement or whatever else you might want to think. But my biggest concern is that because it's a ruling, there are going to be more people who throw that around without considering the specifics of their own children or other children, and that of the relationships between teachers and their students.
And what do you think about the actual relationship dynamics between students in the classroom, right? Like if you have students whose parents are opting out of certain material, obviously you're going to have students who are seeing some material and other students that are not. Are
Right.
there How do you foresee that happening, or impacting the relationship that students have?
Whoa. I mean, what it ends up doing is in a lot of ways, like I think about it as comparing it to like the free lunch program, right? Can remember growing up and like if you were a kid who qualified for free lunch, all of a sudden you were that kid. Oh my gosh, that kid gets free lunch. And you all of a sudden have this separation that is very clear and very obvious and really destructive, right? I think what we put at risk then when kids are opting out of material, cool. That is a freedom that I think we should be allowed, but it is that implicit, like, you can't have access or you're not allowed to read this because we fundamentally disagree, that ends up again, it flags kids. And then all of a sudden there's this, I envision this set of students then is all of a sudden flagged in some way, shape, or form. And in adolescence, because I teach in middle school, I think that that's a really damning thing. All kids want, especially in middle school, is to feel included. And when you start to divide, especially without that conversation, I all of a sudden find myself as a teacher having to, you know, have to talk about harder things, right? Like, how do we navigate this? Okay, here are the haves and the have-nots, or the can or cannots, and make sure that everybody is still not only getting all of their curriculum and getting all of their standards and all that stuff, but also having to, float this happy boat on a sea that seems very split. Um, Now, have there been instances where kids, parents have said, "Hey, I would rather my kid not read, say, Huckleberry Finn"? Sure. That hasn't happened specifically in my classroom, but it has happened in others that I am aware of. Um, but in those situations, there's alternates, but it almost always misses the point. You know what I'm saying? Like, There are options, but there are so many important key features in the books that we procure for kids to help them build ideas and help them have the hard conversations and help them grow their amazing adolescent brains that feel like they're constantly shooting off fireworks, you know? I just imagine it being very divisive and only adding more potential drama to classrooms.
And as far as actually implementing a ruling like this where parents can opt out, do you force, and I know you're not on, a school board or you're not
Hmm.
actually making the policy that would implement this,
Hmm.
but how do you foresee that happening? Like just as logistics go, do you have any ideas about how this would work?
I mean, when I think about my own district, I mean, the initial stopping place would be within our school board. You know, there are already policies in place so that parents can communicate their needs and their thoughts in regards to curriculum or things that students read in the classroom. Um, they're not bans by any means. So I see it first, of course, starting at the school board level. Um, any complaint that is issued to a school teacher is oftentimes then taken to a building principal, which then makes its way up. But oftentimes, any concerns that parents have about books or materials that kids could check out from classroom libraries or even our own like media center are oftentimes taken to first building administrators. And oftentimes, we can meet parents with their concerns there and help them with their own individual concern without it having to be a full on ban. The concern, of course, here is like if a parent then issues a concern and we have the backing of, some rulings, Supreme Court and otherwise, then we have an issue of taking something away from all students. And that is what I foresee as being extremely problematic, especially for our queer communities and for kids who are just trying to find their way in through middle school. Um, and so I guess I see it being facilitated in the same way that I see things even right now in my current district. If something is brought as a concern to me, then it's taken to our building administrators, and then it goes from there. It would be my hope that we could mitigate any initial concerns by having those really hard conversations and focusing on the individualized student before we go and just take materials away from all kids.
And I know you mentioned, I mean, middle school, you mentioned several times that middle school is often very hard for students. I know it was hard for me. It was hard for many
Hmm.
of my friends. It's, hard for everyone.
Hmm.
But some people, when they grow through middle school, that's when they're finding out things about their sexuality, about themselves. So I'm just wondering about those kids who are, whether they're questioning their sexuality, whether they're, questioning their gender. How does this impact them?
Yeah, and that's I'm gonna try not to get emotional. When I have kids come to me who say things like, I just don't feel like I belong, or, you know, Mrs. Rockwell, I don't think I would ever hurt myself, but I don't know if I can keep doing life the way that it's happening. It's really heart-wrenching. We're talking about students who, um, they may have families that are, confused, maybe mildly supportive or not supportive at all. And books are such a beautiful space where kids can feel like they can relate. Um, to remove stories that kids can relate to is, I see it being absolutely catastrophic to communities of kids who already feel like they don't have a place, they don't have a voice, they have no value. Um, I think about, I mean, even, oh gosh, a story, pumpkin, I had a kid pick that up off the shelf and because it had a rainbow cover and they were like, oh my gosh, this looks so gay, I want to read it. And I said, okay, talk to me about that. Where's that coming from? And they're like, well, I just, I'm gay and I just feel like I want to read stories like me. I was like, okay, that's great. You go ahead, let's read this, like come back and talk to me about it. And they find out, of course, throughout the story that not only is the main character gay, but he is also interested in drag. And this kid, after finishing the book, was just like, Like, I've never been interested, but it was so amazing to watch a character feel so comfortable and confident after coming over all of. So it wasn't just about the character being gay. It wasn't about the character watching drag. It was about the character realizing that they had a community that they belonged to. And that's what that student held on to. The student said, wow, this is a kid who went through all these obstacles and was ostracized and made fun of and found a place where he could call home. And that for me was the key feature of the conversation. And I want all kids to have access to that. I want my brown kids to have books about brown kids. And I want my kids who live in mixed families to have books about mixed families and step parents and things. Why eliminate an entire selection of books where kids feel like they can finally belong? It just, it hurts my heart.
What do you hope comes out of this, or what, like, is there an optimistic sort of answer to all of this?
Having the hard conversations. I want all of my students to never bow out of hard conversations when they have to talk about things that might make them uncomfortable, because it's in the discomfort that the most important learning happens. We see students talk to each other, and if there's a conflict, the most beautiful thing to come out of that conflict is oftentimes either a resolution that could have, maybe it's not the most comfortable, but at least they come to a conclusion where they can both walk away and say, wow, I'm really glad I heard that perspective, even if they disagree. And if we can say that in conflict between kids, we want there to be an outcome where kids can resolve them in a manner that is both respectful, and for them to both bow out and say, hey, I either like I agree with you or I disagree with you, but I appreciate your point of view, then man, I feel like I've done my job. It is my hope that with this ruling that parents can approach in the same way. I want to have the difficult conversations with parents. I want them to open my eyes. I want to open their eyes. I want to hear their concerns. I want them to hear mine. And I want us to both be able to then come to some sort of resolution that doesn't forget the whole child. That when we make decisions without including them, because we feel like, oh, they're getting exposed to these things. Nothing is, at least in my experience, nothing is being put out there in some like, come read this literature, my little minions. Nothing is being presented in that way. But when a kid is interested or questioning or concerned about belonging, I want for that conversation to happen. And so for parents who are looking at this ruling, or parents who have concerns or cheering this on or whatever have you, have the hard conversations. Don't bow away if you're like, well, what if? Or if you're coming in like, oh yeah, I want to make sure we remove these things. Have the conversations, but also open your mind. Listen to your kids. Listen to what your teachers are providing as tools. None of these things are I don't know, none of these things seem non-negotiable. These are things that we can talk about. And I think that if there's going to be a positive, it's those conversations. It's about um, finding resolution and finding I don't know, but even an agree to disagree. I think that those things are important and valuable.